Okay, so first thing we're dealing with basically, guys, is the Congress. Now let's talk a little bit, some simple things that you guys should already have in your brain, okay? One, how many houses of Congress are there? There are two. Pretty self-explanatory, simple. It's bicameral, right? Now, we're going to talk about basically how the Constitution set up Congress and how we decided we were going to run it, okay? You guys got to understand something. When Congress was first introduced, this idea, we had broke away from Great Britain. We had went through the Articles of Confederation. So this new idea of a bicameral Congress fit very well with the way Great Britain had ran things. Y'all guys understand me? If you guys think, we didn't want to have anything to do with Britain because that's literally who we just broke away from, right? So us going back to this process of looking similar to them probably took a lot of effort on a lot of people's part. But we're going to talk about how we got to the Congress that we have historically, the practical reason for it, and then the theoretical reason for it. And then there's just a couple of definitions. So this is literally going to take maybe 10 or 15 minutes to go through. So hopefully it'll make sense. All right. So we're going to talk about why we have a bicameral Congress, the difference between a term and a session. That is important. Okay. And then you've already kind of heard about this part, but the situation in which the president may convene or end a session in Congress where he can tell them to leave or he needs them to come back in. So that's what we're kind of going to talk about today. A couple of definitions. We don't have to write down the word bicameral because I feel like I've talked about it enough. What does bicameral mean? Two houses. So there's really no point in us having to put that down. Okay? Now, if you'll look at number 4 on your paper, because we kind of jump around with this, it asks you what a term of Congress is. Okay? In your notes up there, it says a term is a 2-year period during which the U.S. Congress meets, starting in January of each odd-numbered year. Okay? So, it asks you what a term of Congress is. It's basically the length of a term an elected official serves. Okay? But we're going to put down a couple ideas here. So, the first thing beside of the word term that I want you to put down is that it's a 2-year period when Congress meets. A 2-year period when Congress meets. Okay? The next part in that question, beside a term, put down that it is the length an elected official serves. Now, you're probably sitting there thinking, why does it just say length? Don't they all get elected for the same amount of time? No, they don't. Okay? If you are a member of the House of Representatives, you get elected to a 2-year term. Does everybody understand me? They're in office for 2 years, then they either try to get reelected or someone else beats them, right? A senator is elected to a 6-year term. Y'all guys with me? So the word term here, I can't exactly give you a great definition as far as a term because some of them's 2 years, some of them 6 years. The reason they do that is because it's staggered. That means every year we are electing or trying to re-elect someone new in the Congress to keep it fresh ideas, fresh innovations going. Okay? So, the term is the length of time an elected official serves, and it's a 2-year period during which Congress meets. Okay? Simple enough so far? Okay. The next definition you have, it's actually not a definition, it asks you within the up at the top there, it says, what is a session of Congress? Y'all with me? Number 5. We just talked about what a term was. So now we're going to do a session. These get confusing, so let's not make it confusing, okay? So as far as your notes are concerned, it says a session for the U.S. Congress is the period of time during which Congress assembles and conducts businesses. It says there are 2 sessions in each term. So, what is a session of Congress? Basically put down, it's when they perform legislative work. That's the first thing that you need to jot down beside a session. It's when they perform legislative work. When they are actually trying to pass bills, policies, anything of that nature. It's when they perform legislative work. Okay? Now, here's the kicker, and this is the part that you're probably going to see more of. Put down that there are 2 sessions in every term. Now, let's blow your minds here. Up here beside the term, I said, how long do they usually last? 2 years. So if there are 2 sessions per term in office, everything's 2 here, right? 2, 2, 2, right? Okay, keep that in mind. Everybody with me? Any confusion on that? Okay. Now, the actual definitions you have at the bottom of your paper are right here. The word adjourn, we wrote this down the other day, and I felt like a lot of you didn't know, well, a day. They didn't know what I meant by the word adjourn, okay? If you adjourn something, guys, you're basically ending it, okay? You're suspending it until you can pick it up again, okay? So, beside of the word adjourn, just simply put down it's to suspend a session. I know your book says suspend operations until the start of the next congressional session. I want you to write down session. So it's to suspend a session until the next one. Okay? So basically whatever they were doing in that session, they're going to pick back up once they reconvene. You guys understand that? So adjourn simply means to suspend until they can pick it back up in the next session. Okay? And then the last one, you got the word recess and prorogue. I've already done that one. Don't worry about these two. Drop down to special session. If you guys watch the notes from the other class period at the A-Day, which I'm sure all of you did, because it shows me how many views they get on YouTube, slackers. But anyway, okay. It's asking you what a special session is. And I put in those notes the other day that the president has the ability to call Congress into a session. You guys know that Congress doesn't work all year, okay? Now, sometimes things happen that the president needs Congress to be there, okay? 9/11 happened. I'm pretty sure, I can't remember if Congress was in session or not, but let's just say they weren't, okay? If they are not in session and something that catastrophic happens, the president has the ability to make them come in. They don't have the option. They have to show up in order to make some decisions on things that are going on, okay? So, beside a special session, put down that it is an emergency meeting. Or excuse me, yeah, it's an emergency meeting called by the president. And that is when Congress has to show up. It's an emergency situation that the president has called them back into session. Okay? And again, guys, pretty simple stuff. This is not rocket science. Okay? Now, let's get into the nuts and bolts of this. At the top of the paper, it's basically asking you how we came up with the 2 houses of Congress. What was the idea behind having 2 houses? Because you guys remember, when we broke away from England, they had the House of Commons and the House of Lords that made up Parliament, right? We were mad at Parliament because they were taxing us without representation. We didn't have a say-so, correct? So why are we reverting back to something that we know that we didn't like? That's the idea, okay? So the first question there, and it's actually on the board too, says, why does the Constitution establish a bicameral legislature? So meaning a 2-house Congress. Why did we establish this? Number 1, ask us what the historical reason for Americans choosing a bicameral system was. And that's pretty simple. If you look at it, it says it is modeled on the 2 houses of the British Parliament and colonial legislatures. So basically, for number 1, the historical reason that we have 2 houses in Congress is we stole the idea from England. Okay? And the only reason we stole it from them is that's really the only government we had any knowledge of. Okay? So we modeled it after the Parliament, after the British Parliament. Now, obviously, we didn't do the same things that Parliament did. We allowed people to have a say-so. Y'all with me? But we basically modeled it after what we saw Britain had, the British Parliament. So that's the historical reason behind it. So far, so easy. Makes sense. Most of you probably already have this part down. Okay? Number 2 says, what is the practical reason for Americans choosing a bicameral system? Practically, you guys got to think, when we put the Constitution together, we all met at the Constitutional Convention, right? If you guys remember, the Constitutional Convention's idea was to revise the Articles of Confederation. Then we realized we just needed to scrap the entire thing, right? So we get the Virginia plan for the larger states. We get the New Jersey plan for the smaller states. And we got a lot of bickering going on between the colonies on how we feel the Constitution should set up our government, right? So the practical reason for America choosing a bicameral system is it settled a conflict. And that's what I would put down. Put down that it settles a conflict between the Virginia and the New Jersey plan. It was the compromise that brought it together, okay? The compromise that brought it together. All right, and then the last question you have there, it says, what is the theoretical reason for Americans choosing a bicameral system? Basically, guys, we can answer that with 3 simple words. Write down checks and balances, okay? Okay? Checks and balances. It allowed the one branch to check on the other, back and forth when they was trying to pass legislation. So simply checks and balances. Okay? So that's literally the first part of chapter 10. Does anybody have any questions about that? See it done. All right, guys, I'm going to send you the little 10-question thing that we've been doing.